after 2 long weeks, welcome back to a brand spanking new for everyone episode of Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host and CEO, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host and author of the hit white novel Kelly is Unbreakable, Jackson Keller. Order it on Amazon right now.
Jesus Christ, you went right into that real fucking hard. Listen, I have to respect it, especially because it does, honestly, that hardcore shilling does play into what we're about to talk about fairly well. So props for keeping on brand.
However, it's not relevant.
It's a stretch, I will say that much. But you know what? Having finished the book, Kelly's Unbreakable, order on Amazon.com. It's pretty good, I guess.
Thanks, buddy.
We're back, and after I don't know how long we've been kicking this can down the road, but it's
like
been
an entire
bit.
month at this point.
A month minimum.
We had to do 2 episodes so I could shill the book that I just got done shilling, and then I decided to go on an adventure for 2 weeks.
And I had to move people and also play D&D and ran out of time to watch the movie and asked if we could push it back. So it worked out well because y'all got to hear some free bonus episodes from our Patreon, patreon.com/BIDHcast. That'll be restarting next month. Keep an eye on that. This has been 2 minutes of shilling, Jackson. Can you imagine if this is someone's first episode?
I mean, I don't know what would possess someone to randomly click on an episode about the Social Network, so I'm just going to have to bank on the fact that it's probably not many people's first.
That's fair. Fingers crossed. If it is, I promise we're not normally this bad, but a lot's been happening recently, and we just need to catch up. We're talking about the Social Network, as Jackson just said. David Fincher's 2010, not documentary, but biopic, kind of?
Yeah, that's a good way. That counts. It falls under that genre.
Biopic of Mark Zuckerberg creating Facebook up to 2010. And in that way, it's a little quaint because we've had 11 more years of Facebook and things have changed, but also they really haven't.
Yeah, isn't that the most depressing thing of them all? So I have seen The Social Network before. I saw it in theaters and enjoyed it very much, but have not watched it since. I believe I was the one who brought up maybe watching it because I've been curious for precisely this reason.
We talked about it way back when. Like, this is something we've been kicking around, at least internally, since like October of last year. But I was like, hey, the election's coming up, and I don't know whether I can mentally handle a film about Facebook. In hindsight, I probably could have. It really wasn't that rough of a film. But like, as it was looming over us and Facebook looming even further, I was like, later. And then later came and we watched it.
And there were even more objective reasons that Facebook and the social media sphere it helped create are a blight on society. Even more so.
It's incredible. It doesn't end, and yet we're still on social media, and I am upset about that.
Because this is our lives now. There's no escaping unless you return to Monk and go off the grid, basically.
Or get so popular you officially can just forego it.
That's very true. I don't know if anyone's even capable of doing that anymore. I think the old guard of like celebrities who don't need to be influencers as well, I think that those days have passed.
Yeah, probably. Fuck. This is my first time watching The Social Network. Just to transition back to the actual topic at hand, even though we haven't really strayed too far from it. And I really like the film. I can safely say that. I thought it was a brilliantly done movie. I can safely say that Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher, absolutely masters of their craft, wonderful at everything they do. Fantastic little small gags running throughout it. Some of them so quick that you're not really even sure that they're gags. Some of them are just such small visual gags that you're like, wait, was that actually a thing? And then it definitely was. There's some fantastic stuff. This movie's incredible, just hands down. It's a great, great movie. As I said, though, 11 years down the road, it's a little quaint, especially it's ending like 5 minutes, which we'll talk about later, of course, once we hit spoilers. But it is also worth mentioning that it's a little bit quaint for both its executive producer and the individual playing the Winklevoss twins, both of which have been canceled's not the word, because cancel culture is a weird can of worms that doesn't fully exist, but definitely had light shed on them, I think is the way of putting it. Their transgressions have been made known.
They have been the recipients of many credible and well-founded accusations of misconduct.
So if you're gonna go sit out to watch this movie, it's worth knowing, especially if you're sensitive to that type of stuff, that, you know, bad people are involved with it. And also bad people are in it because it's about Mark Zuckerberg. Hey-oh.
Oh, stinky. So I guess I haven't given my opinion on the movie since I saw it, because I was indeed a teenager when I watched this, and therefore probably enjoyed it for different reasons than I do now.
And also it is just as relevant, but it was far more of its time, so to speak.
Yeah, it was not like, this isn't, so if you're coming to The Social Network in 2021 wondering if this is gonna be like something as hard hitting as like the Patriot AI speech at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, like this ahead of its time mind blower of a breakdown of what exactly is fucked about the internet and the social media in particular, it's not that. However, while I do have some major gripes with the ending is my biggest gripe for sure, I will say I am genuinely impressed with how good the movie is at identifying like the sort of rottenness at Facebook, and again sort of the broader social media sphere it helped create's core, more than I don't want to say more than I was expecting, because, you know, the people involved are smart. Like, you know, the reason that we sought this out is that we were watching, I believe we started tossing this around when we watched Zodiac, and Zodiac is a really, really great film. And so, you know, I don't want to say that it's unexpected, but I found myself focusing more on the stuff that still did resonate. Like, thematically, it does a really good job of, through showing, you know, a dramatized version of the events of Facebook's creation, gets kind of at the core of a lot of the problems. Now, it doesn't anticipate specific problems like, you know, Russian bots or the Capitol riots or radicalization or anything like that, because frankly, I wouldn't expect someone making a movie about Facebook in 2010 to predict those things. But based on the information that the movie had, that, you know, the directors and the filmmakers had, I'd say it's very, very good at demonstrating what's fucked up about social media. And it does so in a way that, although, like you say, it's definitely quaint is a good word, but it never feels untrue, except for maybe that ending, which we'll talk about. But it never feels like, you know, it's like a wrong or hopelessly naive take. Like, the movie is very critical of Zuck and Facebook, and it's critical in ways that I think are still well-deserved.
Yeah, saying it's of its time was not meant to, like, I've previously used that to describe a movie that, you know, drops an unacceptable slur today and be like, it's of its time, but there's still good ideas around it. By me saying it's of its time is entirely based just around the fact that it came out in 2010 and 11 years of history has happened since then surrounding Facebook. Like, there's nothing about it that makes it feel old or dated outside of, we know what happens for the next 11 years, and that kind of dates it a bit in that regard. But like, there's nothing about it that's like inherently, oh, well, come on, that we know now that that's not right type of thing. It's just this came out in 2010 type of thing. Yeah,
and I think it also helps that the movie wasn't trying to be like the cutting edge. Like, even from 2010, the stuff that had happened was in the past, with the exception of maybe the lawsuits. I don't know exactly, because, you know, the movie's framing device is the twin lawsuits of
which so fucking clever. Sorry, keep going. I just needed to.
No, it's great. It's great. Like, I love the way this movie cuts back and forth between all those.
Not even twin lawsuits, like, because there's multiple. Because it starts off with the administration board. Oh no, well, kind of. The administration board's its own thing.
Yeah, that's more like just in the events of like the past, whereas like what I'd call the framing device, like the finger quotes present day stuff, is the lawsuits between his old partner that he betrayed, Eduardo Saverin, and the Winklevoss twins, who are accusing him of IP theft.
And like it's really incredible watching it for the first time, and when you're not really sure what's happening with it yet, because it does start off in the past and you're expecting to be a very conventional tale of the movie just moving forward from point A to point B, like we start when he came up with the idea and when it, ends, essentially catches up to modern day. And then it throws a loop in there and it's like, oh, we're going to cut ahead to this trial, and it cuts back, and then it cuts ahead to a trial, and then in the middle of that trial cuts to a different trial, and you're kind of like thrown off kilter for a second, like, wait, what the fuck is going on here? Isn't this the same trial? Because it's a lot of the same people involved, and the only difference is like they're in a different room and clothes have changed, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then like when it clicks, you're just like, oh shit, this is fucking brilliant in its execution.
I had forgotten about this framing device element, but I loved it so much on the revisit. And like not only is it just like really smartly directed and written and woven together, it really helps give the movie a certain kind of energy, like a kind of playfulness that, I think a problem a lot of biopics have is that they are just, what's the old adage, like boring movies are just series of images of people talking. I feel like biopics and bad dramas in particular threaten to go into that realm if there's no sort of like vision or panache to the way that things are staged. But that sort of like cutting back and forth, that sort of like leaning on the fourth wall, like when a character will give a report in the present day about like, and at the time he said this, and like it'll cut them off right as they're about to say the sentence, just cut back to the past and like keep you moving. Like it does a really great job. And again, Fincher's an amazing director, so this is as expected of my man. But it does an amazing job of just keeping that energy, keeping that momentum, never feeling like it's just a series of boring images of bros talking.
And if you want to talk about things that just keep the momentum of the film moving, the fucking movie is about half a shot away from being just a straight up horror movie. Like the entire structure of it, especially like him walking home when you've got the Nine Inch Nails guys doing the backing soundtrack, and I can't remember his name right now, and I apologize to the Nine Inch Nails
Trent
fans.
Reznor?
Trent Reznor, yes, thank you.
Yep.
Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, like his walk home after the breakup impetus for Facebook, essentially, it feels like there's just this haunting underlying synth to it. Everything feels like he's about to get murdered or murder someone. And I mean, the payoff is Facebook, so I guess he's not far off. But I mean, there's a lot of scenes like that where there's just like a heavy tension looming around. And Sam even commented on it as we were watching it, of like, this feels like it's about to turn into a horror movie. And it really, really does pretty much at any time. And part of that too is just Jesse Eisenberg plays Zuckerberg like an absolute psychopath.
Yes, I love Eisenberg's performance in this. I think especially because one thing that's sort of the elephant in the room, that's kind of always the elephant in the room of these biopics, is like accuracy. These aren't documentaries. Liberties are taken both, in the creative decisions from the actors and especially from the writer. I mean, Sorkin admits that like he, tightened some things up, combined events, like played things a certain way. Like, this is not a secret.
This is an adaptation of events, essentially, because this is based off a book that was based off hearsay, specifically from the Winklevoss twins and Sovereign, that, right there, when you only have 3 core pieces to it, and they are essentially court documents from the cases involving these 3 people, it's all going to be told from a certain perspective no matter what. And then from there, it got turned into a book, which is simultaneously being developed into this movie. So, like, there's some steps removed from it for sure.
Yeah, don't watch the movie, and this is a good rule of thumb for any biopic, unless the movie you are watching is specifically a documentary. Like,
and even then, a lot of these things can be quite stretched. I mean, Werner Herzog, I was reading a lot about this, actually, and they're talking specifically this in particular. It was either an AV Club or like a Vice article talking about this film. And they're like, yeah, I mean, even Werner Herzog, like lauded documentarian, has a term known as the ecstatic truth, which is to say, you know, it's the truth, but maybe a little bit more emphasis put in certain places to spin it one way or another. Like, it's important to have that media literacy in all things, even documentaries, things that portend to be very straightforward. Actually, if you're looking for something really interesting, Dan Olson, Foldable Human, has a video about the time that a bunch of astrophysicists got tricked into being in a documentary where they basically said that flat Earth is a thing. So if you're looking for a good way to prove that documentaries aren't always accurate, check that out. Sorry, continue.
No, I mean, that was important because I almost just said something very dumb, so I'm glad you came in and corrected it. Editing is a hell of a powerful tool, folks, but especially with something where, like, there is a screenwriter, right? Like, that's even going to be a step removed from a documentary. There are going to be stuff that's done for narrative or dramatic convenience. This is also true.
Oh, man, I don't know where that... Oh.
Well, we'll get to that elephant in the room. This is also true, I should add, you know, to redeem my smooth brain take that I almost gave. This is also true of nonfiction writing. You should be careful.
Everything is written from a perspective, even if you try really, really hard not to. It's impossible to distance yourself from your biases. Always keep that in mind.
There's your media literacy tip for the day, kids. But yeah, so this movie, though, like, I think it does what a good drama should, and that through its presentation of events, it's told in such a way that it feels true. And I don't mean that in a way that, like, you know, a cozy conspiracy theory, an unfounded conspiracy theory feels true, but in that loftier way of, like, speaking to some sort of truth about the human condition. And in this case in particular, it's about the flaws of social media and the people behind it, which is basically that Facebook was made by, you know, a bunch of, you know, depending on your interpretation, you know, dude bros or frat boys or, you know, distant, cold, sociopathic tech boys. It had deeply misogynistic roots through its genesis as the Face Smash app. Even if that didn't happen after a breakup, that still happened. And the way that happened, the way that those misogynistic roots are presented as, like, a really vapid, privacy invading, soulless, algorithm driven, like, clickbait nightmare, that's Facebook. That never went away. And I think that it's elements like that and, you know, Eisenberg's performance, I just really love. So I'm not talking about spoilers. I feel like the first scene is on the table. That first scene might be my favorite scene in the entire movie, when he's just, like, being a dick to his girlfriend and gets broken up with because of it, and being a dick in such a way that, like, he doesn't even know it. Like, with that one scene, you know everything you need to know about arguably the real Zuckerberg, but definitely this Zuckerberg, to, like, understand the conflicts and the insecurities that are going to be powering him through the rest of the movie, and why that sort of lack of empathy and humanity is a bad trait in someone creating a tool that pretends to be about, like, humanity and empathy and human connection, when, in his own words, it's very much not about those things. It's about being the biggest, coolest, smartest boy and being exclusive until it's not. I love that there's such a discussion over ads. Like, he's so adamant about not having ads in the movie because it ruined the cool factor of Facebook. And I guess he was right, but it didn't matter at that point, because now that Facebook's one of the biggest platforms for ads, that's how it makes so much fucking money.
Also, Facebook being cool, wild sentiment right there.
There was a time, I do remember there was a time.
God, remember Mafia Wars?
Remember Farmville?
Fuck, man,
Things were still bad then.
that was such a wild time for just, I mean, everything. Like gaming, that was the impetus for mobile gaming in a lot of ways. That was just everything about it. And you can see its impacts. This is not relevant to anything, but I mean, it kind of is. Like the impacts of Farmville and all that stuff and how they trickled down into the monetization of mobile games today, where they realize that people just want to see numbers go up and we can just charge people money to make numbers go up faster. And that has become so prevalent across all sorts of just mobile apps. Like the best type of free app that you can pay for are the ones where it's like, hey, do you like this app? Give us $10. We'll get rid of the ads for you. Yeah, fuck yeah, that's a great monetization scheme because it means that you're getting paid for it. It's not like predatory in any way, shape, or form, but like the current monetization scheme of everything, and this isn't even getting into loot boxes, but just the monetization of time is so fucking predatory and so insidious in its own way, and it's fucking Farmville and goddamned Mafia Wars. Jesus Christ.
Now, and it's like, obviously, again, the movie doesn't explicitly predict this stuff, but like there's a lot of stuff that the characters say that is like, we want the right people on here. We want to keep them on the site for as long as possible. We want to like have them like reloading the page like a certain amount of time so their eyes are glued to it. We want them to live their entire lives through this website. Like a Final Club online is how he puts it. And shit's fucked.
God, remember Dakota Johnson saying that, yeah, she goes on like 5 or 6 times a day? I do, before we get into spoilers, I kind of want to talk spoiler free about the ending a bit, because we've been really dogging on it as an ending. And I think that there's a lot of really good reason to dog on it as an ending with the context that we have, again, in 2021. But I think as an ending to a film in even 2010, I think it's a fine ending. It bookends the film fairly nicely. I mean, it is a competent, functional, solid ending to a movie if it wasn't about Mark Zuckerberg.
If it wasn't about Mark Zuckerberg, and maybe, like, to be fair, it's a very... There've been, like, comparisons, fair ones, I think, made to Citizen Kane, because it, too, is about, you know, a rich man who rises to power and sort of brings about, you know, whatever, is hoisted by his own petard, classic Greek tragedy stuff. You know, that's a form as old as storytelling itself. So it makes sense that they played this ending the way that they did it, especially because things have gotten so much worse with Facebook. It's one of the only things in the movie that feels wrong, like, going forward today. But I think more so, and maybe just this is my own personal bias talking, is that I think that when it comes to this kind of story, the rich and powerful, you know, Greek tragedy model, there was a movie that came out just a few years after this that was ostensibly about the same thing, but I think ended in a way that was much more resonant. And that, of course, is one of my favorite movies of all time that I reference a lot on the show, which is The Wolf of Wall Street, which I think has a lot.
I was bracing myself for you to say District 9, and I don't know why.
District 9 is not one of my favorite movies of all time still. It was when I was a teenager, but I'm not a teenager anymore.
Like, it was just like in that time zone, and I'm like, is he about to say District 9? Because I think I might quit the podcast if he does.
No. I'm talking about Wolf of Wall Street. And so I guess for the comparison, we get into spoilers for Wolf of Wall Street, but I don't think either of these movies are necessarily the kind of movie that's like made worse by knowing stuff about the ending. But just in case, I'll throw that here too.
No, I mean, spoilers on both of these. You're right. Yeah, knowing the ending doesn't change it, because it's not like some narrative arc. When it's about a real fucking person, you can't really spoil it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's dive into spoilers for both Wolf of Wall Street, although that's going to be very brief, so don't worry too much about that, as well as The Social Network. But Before we do, as always, if you enjoy the show, follow us on Twitter at BADHcast. Go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. That is starting up again here very soon. Please take a look at it. Sign up if you want to. And if you are one of our stallions, give us some suggestions of things that you want us to talk about. We're open to them. Next week, we're doing something kind of weird, honestly. Jackson been wanting to watch The Social Network, and he said, Sean, pick something. So I picked a skateboarding documentary. We're watching Minding the Gap. It's supposed to be really fucking good, so stick around for that one.
Even though I am not a skateboarding boy, this sounds like a great movie, and I am excited. So
it's in the Criterion Collection. Spoilers! Let's do it. Jackson, spoil Wolf of Wall Street and The Social Network for us.
So the ending that we're talking about, in case it isn't clear, is that the movie goes out of its way to humanize old Zuck for a minute. And I know that this is a criticism that will sound a little weird coming from me, because when it comes to villains, and I would consider Zuck a villain both in the movie and in real life, but when it comes to villains, I'm usually advocating for, some sort of humanizing element, if only to make them feel more real. Like when you can understand their motivations, and maybe even like see a bit of yourself in that person. Like it can help to have some sort of clarity, like illustrate some sort of truth about the world. I think the difference here, I think it is mostly a matter of time, because again, just having Zuck sort of regret his words and deeds and like send a Facebook request, like, and look kind of sort of pathetic and lonely as he reaches back out to the girl that dumped him for being an ass at the beginning of the movie. Like dramatically, that's fine. And again, it's not like I'm sitting here saying that the real life Zuck, much as we might clown on him for being a robot, like isn't a human being. He does have feelings, but it's a question of narratively, how much do we care that he has feelings for this particular story? And
I mean, I wonder if so much of that is just because we are so tainted by outside influences. I don't want to necessarily disagree with what you're presenting here, but I do think, like, as I mentioned already, we can never truly purge our biases. And so, like, my biases when I see this, even though the fact that I know that this is not the Zuckerberg that we see presenting in front of Congress as to why Facebook is good, actually, I still look at him and be like, well, you know what? Fuck you anyway.
Yeah, and I guess, like, it would be different. And again, I think most of this is just that this story, they couldn't have known. Like, if only you knew how bad things really were, right? Like back in 2010. I think that's part of it. But the reason I bring up Wolf of Wall Street, which is roughly contemporary and maybe had the advantage of having a little bit more distance from its subject material, because the main action of like the Jordan Belfort, like Stratton Oakmont, like Wall Street stuff was in the 80s and 90s.
It had like a 10-20 year distance from it, didn't it?
Yeah, at least. And because the thing about The Wolf of Wall Street is that, again, it's a very similar movie. It's the kind of movie where, like, it's a powerful man sort of rising and falling. Like, they're despicable people, but the movie sort of implicitly or explicitly gestures at, like, identifying with them. There's a lot of partying. There's a lot of stuff to, like, sort of draw the viewer in and make it look sexy. But I think the difference with The Wolf of Wall Street is that movie ends very pointedly with Jordan Belfort suffering no real consequences for what went down. He gets a little bit of a slap on the wrist, but the movie ends.
I had to play tennis in prison.
He had to play tennis in prison, and I love this even more, that the very last scene, the real Jordan Belfort gets a cameo introducing the movie version of himself to a slow pan down of a bunch of suckers, like, waiting to hear how they can become the next him. Like, that is biting. That is dark. And that feels a lot more true to me, that he just kind of gets away with it. And I would argue that even, again, I would have to know the exact timeline, so I'm not going to come down like super hard on the movie, but even with this lawsuit stuff, it's not like this is the great undoing of Mark Zuckerberg. That basically was a slap on the wrist to him. And depending on when the movie was finished, they might have even known that at the time.
I mean, you could already fairly easily tell that it was a fairly light slap on the wrist. It was already valued at $1 billion company, and they mentioned that like the total damages were somewhere in the vicinity of like 10 million-ish.
Yes, no. And so yeah, I don't want to come down super hard on the movie, just for not being Wolf of Wall Street, which isn't entirely fair. But yeah, like that, I think it's just a combination of like, maybe it's that we stuck too close to the Citizen Kane formula of like having it end on a real like pathetic note. But again, it's easier to reconcile that stuff in like Citizen Kane and like maybe actually feel some pity for him because he is a fictional character. Whereas Zuckerberg, his power level, I mean, it's like this movie's about Zuckerberg when he's like Frieza level, and Zuckerberg's at like God of Destruction level now in terms of like wealth and influence.
To be clear, that means he starts off powerful and gets really, really powerful. For those of you who aren't in the know,
we're coming back after a short hiatus. I had to do it to you. I had to be me. What could I say?
I do think part of the interesting question of this as well. I mean, Zuckerberg himself said that if someone makes a documentary of him, he wants it to be done after he's dead, which I think is honestly a fairly noble goal given how powerful he is in the world currently. Because
that's a fair statement, I think. Yeah. Totally agree.
Like there's definitely a amount of influence that he can exert on projects, and I have to imagine that in some regard his influence was exerted upon Hollywood while this was being made. And that's not to like say that Fincher's some sort of hack director who bows to pressure or whatever, but everyone has to bow to some pressure when they're making a film, and this might have been Zuckerberg pressuring executives who in turn pressure Fincher, or any number of things. And this is entirely conjecture. Do not take any of this as like stated fact. But the way that everything interacts, like it's entirely feasible that because Zuckerberg was still growing in power at the time, he did have some influence as to how the ending of the movie portrayed him. Or if not him, someone on Facebook definitely would have had a vested interest in this. Like the movie itself even presents the idea of, as Rashida Jones is asking him, Mr. Zuckerberg, did you give that school newspaper the scoop about the chicken being fed chicken? That is a leading question right there. And if this movie comes out and just presents Zuckerberg as unambiguously shitty, that presents a question unto itself, and that becomes a PR nightmare for Facebook. So even if Zuckerberg was like, yeah, fuck it, who gives a shit? Facebook, someone on that marketing, someone on that PR team definitely gave a shit.
100%. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily anything resembling a conspiracy. As you said, it could be as simple as like an executive on the board was like nervous about a defamation lawsuit. Now, I think it's good that defamation lawsuits have to meet a pretty high standard in the United States, precisely for this reason. But that is still something they would have been thinking about. Like nobody wants to get sued for libel.
Yeah, and the difference with Jordan Belfort and Mark Zuckerberg is that Jordan Belfort, sure, I guarantee still has a shit ton of money and a decent bit of influence, but you don't hear about him every day.
It's like, Jordan Belfort, part of the point of the story is that, yeah, he got away with it, but like, he's still rich, but he's making his living. He wrote his little memoir that the movie's based off of, went around giving his little snake oil business talks. Like, he's not Mark Zuckerberg.
No, he's a scam artist. He's a shitty person and a scam artist. Or do I have to say something here to make it? He's a scam artist in Minecraft.
There you go.
But he does not have the influence to come back and be like, hey, fuck yourselves. Make me look better in this.
I mean, it sounds like, honestly, like just based off of what I know about Jordan Belfort, and I haven't actually read the book that the movie was based on, but like I imagine just based off of what I have heard that like
he loved the movie anyway.
Exactly. He's just thrilled that someone made a big fancy movie about him, and Leo like played him in the movie, and he gets to like, relive his heyday. Like I wouldn't be shocked at all.
I was thinking about that even as I was saying it, because there is such a different light that both of these characters are presented in, and Jordan Belfort is presented in ostensibly is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this sentence, a good light. Like, he's definitely punished for it, but like it makes his life seem really glamorous and fun. And like the Quaaludes scene, everyone still references and know about. And it's great. Ha ha. Look at it all happening, get weird and fun. And isn't that fun? And it doesn't ever necessarily feel as tragic on the surface as it does in The Social Network, where things definitely feel a lot more pointed, especially because, as you said, the framing device is a courtroom, where the whole idea of it is that there's a sword of Damocles hanging over everyone's head to begin with, whereas you're just watching a man have fun and make a shit ton of money with goddamn Seth Rogen and shit in fucking The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, and this movie is like, especially
Seth Rogen's in that movie, right?
It's Jonah Hill, but
Jonah Hill, that's who I was thinking. I always want to call Jonah Hill Josh Gad, which I feel like is like, if I confuse Jonah Hill and Seth Rogen, I'm at least on the same page. And like, I'm okay with both of those actors. I can't stand Josh Gad, and I was not going to compare them to Josh Gad.
It's amazing. No, I love Jonah Hill in that movie. So when I say who cares, it's just like, yeah, they run around in the same like group. They have the like, they were both in This Is the End. That's my metric for who runs around in the same actor group. Anyways, the criticism, I think, as you say, it's more pointed in that, like, I was a little surprised, or not a little surprised, but it was harder for me to remember that, like, there was going to be a certain portion of the audience who thought that, like, the way Zuck was portrayed here was, like, really cool and sexy. That is something that you cannot forget with Wolf of Wall Street. That, like, that's the whole shtick of that movie, is that, like, tightrope act of, like, when are you laughing with them versus when are you laughing at them, really? Like, the identification aspect is very important. This feels more straightforward critical, whereas, like, where the people who identify with Zuck are scarier because the movie is so...
I was watching from fucking a Zoom call, your fucking gears click in your brain trying to come up with what you could say there. That was beautiful. I don't even have the camera on, and I can see your profile picture smoking.
It's so true. That's the best way to put it. But no, like, I would argue that, like, you know, the people who think it's cool to be Zuck or want to be a programming tech boy because of the way Zuck's portrayed in this movie, and they want to be a badass supervillain, I would argue that those people are scarier than, like, the bros looking up to Jordan Belfort, because at least there's, again, some sort of intention to, like, yeah, like, how much fun are you having? And also, isn't that kind of fucked that you're having a lot of fun with this? Like, it's the movie's very pointedly asking a question to the audience. You can argue whether that's a good or a bad thing, whether that's an irresponsible thing, but I think, like, based on a lot of shots in the movie is unquestionably doing that. With this movie, though, from frame one, there's nothing, at least for that first scene, there's nothing sexy about Mark Zuckerberg being, like, a clueless, like, unfeeling piece of shit to his girlfriend. It
opens like a horror movie.
It opens like a horror movie. And so that's why, yeah, it's a little depressing, though, again, not entirely unpredictable, very predictable, in fact, that there are a lot of, like, tech bros who wanted to become like Mark Zuckerberg because of this movie.
It is really interesting, as an aside, and this was not, I don't know if this is relevant to really much of anything outside of the fact that I already went on a video game rant once here, but how similar Mark Zuckerberg felt like John Carmack, or at least how John Carmack was written in the Masters of Doom book that I was reading a couple months back, and like just the parallels between the two of them, and especially like the culture of game development and turning into web development in Silicon Valley in those early years. I mean, it's still pretty rough down there, but like I don't have as much of a frame of reference anymore. But like just the parallels between them, and I mean that culture, especially right now, is under a lot of criticism, the game dev culture, for a lot of reasons. Just the misogyny, the crunch time, everything about game dev culture is under a microscope right now. And it is, I'm curious to see, you know, because that felt like it was happening 10 years prior to this taking place. And I know that it's not entirely accurate, given that obviously dev must have happened before game dev for, you know, chicken and the egg reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that game dev was just way easier to slot into that misogynist, especially as John Romero and John Carmack, and it rocketed themselves to rock star level and let them become who they were, which influenced every other system in being developed. Whereas Zuckerberg, assumingly, did a very similar thing to a lot of other people in the tech space, although clearly from Sean, whatever's Napster dude, clearly was already a thing that was happening. The point I'm making here is that tech culture is bad and it should all fuck off. I don't really have a grand thesis to that. Outside of that, I just thought it was an interesting parallel between the two.
No, and I think it's worth bringing up because it's pretty well documented. I am, of course, a Midwest flyover cow. Do not have the the full scoop on what Silicon Valley is like these days, but it does seem pretty well accepted and well documented that, like, if you are a programmer, it is better for your well-being and mental health to work for Facebook now as opposed to like Rockstar. Game dev today, for a myriad of reasons, I think, you know, there's been some nice investigative journalism about this, still has a reputation for being more like more like the tech bro culture that we see here. Not that it went away in mainstream tech, of course, necessarily, but I think the fact that it was so much more mainstream meant that it came under more scrutiny. And that doesn't mean that shit has been fixed, but yeah, there are still... Video games, as usual, are one step behind even something that is already not good.
Video games, on the whole, are bad.
Pretty bad. But they did give me Banjo-Kazooie, so I'll continue feeding that horrible machine until I get another.
The culture around it, like that idea of basically like they called it being wired in this movie, and you know, going on 36-hour coding binges. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, they expect you to, as your coding robots, be a robot. Like, they just want you to just knuckle down and code incessantly. And like, it's such a weird culture. I mean, this is, as I said, you see all this in Masters of Doom. You see this here, where it is simultaneously a nonstop party and also work at all time of the day. You don't get to sleep until you literally crash and burn. It sounds like a fucking nightmare.
And I wonder if there's something about like tech that's, if there's something unique, like especially with both on like the top level and sort of the rank and file like programmers, in that, like, especially back then, like back when the movies taken place and before and prior, tech tended to attract, you know, of course, nerds. Like it attracts people.
I was thinking about that. Yeah, you get that certain type of person who, you know, is a dork and doesn't mind spending a bunch of time working on a passion project. And you get the higher ups who are sociopaths and opportunistic.
It's like you get the nastiest combination that you get, like, kind of your rank and file are impressionable, lonely people who are passionate about something and therefore can easily be exploited. And then you have like the Zuckerbergs of the world who have like all the worst traits of the big business, like stereotypical cigar chomping like executive, and all the worst traits of like a nerd. You know, like,
I can do it. Why can't you?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe there's something to that. You know, I'm completely blowing smoke out of my ass here, but like this movie, it feels true. So I'm gonna say
there's certainly patterns to that. Obviously, causation and correlation not always the same thing, but it's at this point it is primarily a thought experiment. And you know, as always, we're two assholes with a podcast. Don't take everything we say as gospel.
Oh, on the subject, though, I do have a bounty for our dear listeners. If you're interested in this stuff and you want to make me look like a fool, see, that'll get you going. But if you're interested in this stuff, I only did like a cursory amount of research because, of course, I only had so much time. And one of the things that was frustrating me was that, like, as far as accuracy, most of the criticisms were, of course, coming from Zuckerberg or Facebook adjacent people. I would really be interested in seeing, like, if there is something of a more neutral third party account that has evaluated this film to really sort of get that third perspective. I'd be very interested in seeing this because, of course, like the version you get from Zuck is like, I'm just a hard-working guy who, like, came from Harvard. It's like, shut the fuck up, Zuck. No one cares what you have to say about that. But
oh no, I'm just ripping off the Verge. I was trying to find, because I said I was reading a Verge article and definitely an AV Club article. Oh no, the Verge article is literally titled in 2010 the social network was searing. Now it just looks quaint. Oh no.
My man's got roasted. He did it unintentionally though, so that counts for something.
Seriously, go read the Verge article. Kaitlyn Tiffany wrote a great thing, and it might be what you're looking for, Jackson, but it is definitely, the stuff that I was reading was mostly people who went back to watch it in like 2017, 2020-ish era, and was just like, hey, this movie's kind of weird to watch now.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. That definitely sounds interesting.
I'll put links in the description as well, just to really try and hammer home that I didn't try and plagiarize your word choice, and I am sorry.
Well, I mean, hey, you're doing more than Mark Zuckerberg did for the Winklevoss twins. I don't care what the Winklevoss twins think either. They're Harvard, like, daddy's boy frat boys. Fuck them. Aren't they also involved in some weird shit now?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I remember I heard the name Winklevoss come up in the context of something that was like fucked in a weird specific way, but this could be I'm not sure.
It might be related to the actor playing them.
No, that was separate. I thought that was separate.
Okay. I was just saying, like, actor who played Winklevoss twins did some fucked shit.
Yes, I mean, my brain might be rolling them together, but this is me saying that I'm not sure and asking this only out of intellectual curiosity. This has been said with no ill intent, therefore it does not meet the qualifications for libel. I am not purposefully spreading misinformation.
We clearly just watched a movie that dealt with this because we were both tiptoeing around things that we would have otherwise just been like, fuck it. They're all monsters, burn in hell.
Well, after those, big stinky legal asterisks, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think I'm good, honestly. It's kind of a weird film in that it's hard to really pick apart. I mean, it's great in that regard. It means that the film is really, really good, really well put together. And if we can only really harp on the ending, and even then was much more of just like a ending in context of 11 years later, there's not really a whole lot to say about it. And it's not even really necessarily a movie that is. It's the problem with documentaries is that a lot of times, like, they definitely have things to say about it, but they're all very much written on their sleeve. That's the point of the documentary. So next week should be a challenge, if nothing else.
Hell yeah! Hopefully I don't have a mental breakdown like I did the last time we talked about a documentary. I don't think that'll happen.
Yeah, see, this time it's about skateboarding, which is something that I'm passionate about. Last time it was Mr. Rogers and, like, the internet thing, and you probably mentioned Metal Gear Solid 2 back then as well, so... I mean, listen, you could probably fit Fat Man from Metal Gear Solid 2 into this one. Now that I'm thinking about it, I was trying to challenge myself to come up with something you could fit in. You could probably do that, because he rolled around on roller skates, and that's adjacent.
Well, I'll do my best. I'll do my best to get back to bombs like Fat Man next week.
Man, the time that they did a kickflip, it made me think of the time in Metal Gear Solid 2 where I tripped Fat Man and he fell down.
No, I'm gonna save this truth bullet for next week.
Oh no.
But speaking of next week, if you want to see Sean have a mental breakdown, come back. But in the meantime, if you're wondering if you should watch The Social Network, it is absolutely worth your time. It's a great movie to watch. an interesting movie to noodle about, too.
Yeah, it's fascinating as a piece of film media. As I said, it holds up kind of weird in 2021, which makes it interesting in its own right there. I've been Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. And that's it. Fuck social media.
Fuck social media. Well, unfortunately, I just released a book, so I'm going to have to plug it a little harder. I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, but more importantly, you could go to my website, jacksonjkeller.com, where it'll be a direct link to buy my first novel, Kelly is Unbreakable. It's about a sad girl with superpowers and not Mark Zuckerberg, so she's more sympathetic.
Well, I can confirm that it is a fantastic book, and he didn't even give it to me. I bought the book in a sign of solidarity for him. Don't think he's a bad guy for doing it. I'm just trying to say that he didn't bribe me. That's all. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast for updates on episodes, anything else going on. Again, patreon.com/BADHcast. It's currently paused, but it will be unpaused next month. So if you have a request, get it into us now. We'll get that going. It should run for anywhere between like 3 and 6-ish months. It's kind of unclear, but we have a better understanding that like we're not just going to stop all of a sudden. We'll have a better awareness of when it's going to end, which is why it's been paused for so long. Anyway, there's a bunch of really great episodes on there. You heard 2 of them the past 2 weeks. Just a small taste of what we have on there. There's some great bonus content. Go check that shit out. As always, thanks to those that highlight the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane and Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Also, thanks to 25 Years Later Slate.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can go click on, and you absolutely should. But you should also hang out on that website. Check out what people are writing. There's a lot of really talented people doing a lot of really talented stuff. Read that shit. Next week, Minding the Gap. Skateboarding, y'all. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go